is some of the shaders and material setup for these trees. So if we were to come in and take a quick look at these, what I might do is just temporarily switch this to render out from my perspective view. And let's zoom in on these trees a little bit closer and re-render this, just so we can see this with a little bit more clarity. You can see right now these trees are really just a series of flat little planes. So what we're going to do is come in and start to set up some materials for these to make them look a lot more like leaves. Okay, so let's start by pulling up our material editor. Again, just tap the M key on my keyboard. And let's make a new material for this. Once again, start with the Mental Ray Architectural and Design. There we are. Let's double click on this. And for these leaves, I really don't want these to be reflective at all, so I'll start by just bringing that reflectivity down. For our diffuse color map, let's go ahead and plug in a standard bitmap. And for this, we're going to choose our poplar leaves. So this is this Targa file right here. So let's go ahead and open that up. And if we take a look at this, you can see our texture has been applied. Now, if I were to come in and just simply apply this to our trees, we could take this and have this material be visible as a texture, or rather have the texture be visible, I should say. So now let's come in and just see what this looks like rendered out. Now you can see we do have the texture of these leaves that have been applied, but at the moment you can see that there's really no transparency involved here. So if we were to take the alpha channel from this actually does have an alpha channel, but the problem is if we were to try to plug this into the transparency, it's really not going to work just straight away. So to illustrate this, I'll take this bitmap and plug this into the cutout map of this architectural material. That's really the best thing to use if you're going to be using transparency. So if I plug this in, we can see right away that this really doesn't look quite right. Now we can confirm this by rendering this out. And you can see that the cutout is basically reversed. So instead of the outer portion of these leaves being cut away, it's this inner piece that's being removed. So the quickest and easiest way I find to resolve this is to actually use some kind of a color correct node to pull out the proper alpha channel from this image. So let's go ahead and right click, we'll go to Maps, Standard, and let's drop in this color correction node. Alright, so now we'll use this to bridge the connection, so I'll take my leaf map here, plug this into my color correction. Now if I double click on this, I can start to now set the red, green, and blue channels to something like the alpha. So if I set this to alpha, now you can see we get a nice alpha map here. So if I were to now take this, plug that into the cutout map, all of a sudden now this starts to look much, much better. So Shift Q to re-render. Okay, so that starts to look a little bit better. But if we get in here a little bit tighter, you can see that there's sort of this odd little halo around all of our different leaves. So kind of this white little fringe. So we should be able to fix that by going back into our original bitmap. If we double click on this, let's scroll down, and underneath this alpha source, right now it's set to image alpha, which is correct, but at the moment it's using a pre-multiplied alpha, which is giving us sort of this little halo around the outer portion of our leaves. So again, back within this bitmap, if we turn off this pre-multiplied alpha, now that starts to give us a much cleaner alpha channel. So now if I were to re-render this, now that starts to look much, much better. Okay, so if we were to pull back on this, one of the things that I really don't care for at this time is the overall coloration of these leaves. They seem to be a little bit too dark, maybe a little bit too much on the blue side. So the great thing about using these different shading networks is the fact that we can come in here and very easily color correct some of these different textures. So if I were to, again, right click, drop in a standard map, and we'll use another color correction. This time, I'll bridge the connection between this texture and the diffuse color map. So let me just collapse the thumbnail for this one and expand the one for this color correction so that way it's a little bit easier to see. So if I double click on this color correction, now I can come in and start to switch out some of the colors. So if I find that maybe this is a little bit too deep green or maybe a little bit too much of a blue-green, we can come in here and try to shift some of the hue around a little bit. There we go, until we find something that is maybe just a little bit more suitable for us. There we are. So now it's a little bit more on the green side. We could also come in here and do an overall hue tint. So if we were to choose sort of a yellowish green, and something fairly bright and vibrant. There we are. And now start to increase this strength. We should start to see now a little bit more of an overall color change in this leaf. There we are. So now it's, again, quite a bit more on the green side compared to what we had before. There we are. And now we get some trees that are a little bit more on the green side. And overall, I like this coloration a lot more. So the fact that we can come in here and make these sorts of changes to our textures without having to resort to going back to something like Photoshop to make these changes is really, really nice. And also the fact that we can start with basically one bitmap or one texture, and we can actually use multiple color corrections. So we could have one version of this texture that is a little bit more green, one that's a little bit more blue, one that's a little bit more yellow, and start to pipe these into different shading networks and create different sorts of effects. So very, very versatile having this type of functionality. And oftentimes you'll find that whenever you drop in some kind of a texture or plug this into your shader, again, your shader or your texture may not always look exactly the way you want. So having this type of control and functionality is extremely important. So I'm going to go ahead and now stop the lesson at this point. So whenever we pick up in our next lesson, I will have gone ahead and gone through this exact same process for some of our other trees and vegetation that we have in this scene. And also I will have gone ahead and set up the materials for pretty much everything else, because it's going to rely on essentially these exact same steps of using the architectural material, choosing my color, proper reflectivity, and things like that. So this is going to get fairly tedious fairly quickly, so just to keep things moving along, again, whenever we pick up in our next lesson, I will have gone ahead and take care of